Mojang just released 6 new blocks and items for the new winter drop that you can only get by farming the creaking, which is surprisingly simple, and I'll be showing you all the mechanics and a couple of easy farms for how to get a ton of resin in the new winter drop update. If you want to build these new blocks, you're going to need a ton of resin. It takes 4 to 9 per block. Luckily for you, I have a very simple starter farm that produces about 700 per hour, and you can double it, but that's just to get you started so that you can build a much larger, better modular resin creaking farm. This produces anywhere from 15,000 to 40,000 resin per hour, or even more if you made it larger. So these are all of the new blocks that they just released. As you can see, they are a very nice orange color, but you can only get these by farming the resin clumps, which are themselves a really nice block that you can put onto any surface or have multiple of in one spot, kind of like glow lichen. Now you can only farm these resin clumps by farming creaking hearts, which are now craftable, and we'll get into all of that in a second. But you can smelt the resin clumps in a furnace to get resin bricks, which you can then use to craft resin bricks and all the other things. Now, luckily for us, you don't need to harvest the resin clumps with Fortune 3, because no matter what you do, you always get 1 resin per. Even if you harvest it with a piston, you'll always get 1, and you can even just move the block that it's on, and they'll all break off. Keep in mind that all these features just released in a beta, so things are bound to change. If you're planning on building any of this after the winter drop has released, then check the pinned comment down below for any updates or changes. So every time that you attack a creaking, that is going to activate the creaking heart, which will then spread some of these resins. Now, this guy is basically invulnerable. He doesn't take any form of damage ever, and no environmental damage. So the only way to spread this resin is by basically a player attack or other things that act as a player attack, like dogs or projectiles. So a couple things to know about the creaking spawning is they can spawn in a pretty large range around the creaking heart itself, and that is why basically every creaking farm is going to be up in the air. That way we can manipulate where they spawn. Now, basically all the standard methods of spawn proofing will stop a creaking from spawning, like buttons, slabs, glass, leaves, or redstone. They do not care about light levels, so you can feel free to light up your builds, and they will spawn inside of water as well. Now, they do not spawn during the day, and they can't even exist during the day, so these farms can only be ran at nighttime, which means that all of the hourly rates for our farm are going to rely on 3 nights per hour or 30 minutes of running the farm per hour. So if you're building these on multiplayer servers, you're going to want to ask people not to sleep, because as soon as it becomes daytime, these guys just evaporate. Now, the only way to kill a creaking is to wait for it to become daytime or to actually destroy the heart itself. Even if we remove the logs from above and below the heart, as you can see, it's still active and the creaking is still alive. Now, if you attack this guy and there's no logs above or below the heart, then it's not going to spread any resin, as you can see there. So the heart will be lit up as long as it has logs above and below it, and it has a creaking spawned. So if we remove the logs, it will turn off if it has not spawned a creaking. So as you know, the creaking is not a standard mob, and therefore does not apply standard mob spawning or despawning rules. So this guy can be anywhere inside of your simulation distance. It can be more than 44 blocks away from you on Sim 4, and he will not despawn. The only way that these guys despawn is if they get too far away from the heart. So that means that you can actually have a creaking farm anywhere inside of your loaded chunks, and it will still work perfectly fine. You don't need to be anywhere near it. But you can, of course, still hear that creaking taking damage from basically no matter where you're at, which is really annoying. Every time you attack the creaking, it is going to spread between 1 and 3 of these resin around the creaking heart itself, and this will spread in basically a 7 by 7 diamond all the way around this heart, and that includes, of course, in 3 dimensions as well. Now, these resins can have multiple inside of the same block, and that will spread perfectly fine with the heart mechanics. So if you have one on like an opposing wall right here, that's not going to stop another one from generating right here, for example. Now, the creaking has a 5-second cooldown between summoning resins, so no matter how much you spam this guy, you're only going to be able to get resin to generate every 5 seconds, and that's when you get this particle beam right here. So as you can see, we can attack this guy, and then every 5 seconds, we get 1 to 3 more resin spreading around it. So even if you have a ton of resin around your heart, it will find a place to place more resin within that 7 by 7 diamond. So it's not limited to just right around here. If those spaces are unavailable, then it will continue spreading outwards. We can force the resin to spawn where we want just by blocking off the extra spaces. So as you see, we got buttons on all the surfaces around here. But if we go ahead and attack these guys, as you can see, the resin is forced to spawn where we want it. Now, the resin can be placed on top of the heart itself, but it seems like that's the very last place that it ever wants to put resin. So with all those mechanics in mind, you should basically know how a creaking farm is going to work. We have a creaking heart to summon in one guy here. We got a trident to act as our little annoyance thing to just poke this guy and get some resin to spawn, and some pistons to break the resin off the wall. So this clock is a bit faster than it needs to be, of course, since you can only activate them once every 5 seconds, but ultimately it doesn't really matter, and all of your resin just gets collected down below. So if you want to expand this into a larger farm, I have a pretty decent setup here that can be expanded to pretty large sizes without getting that much lag. So we're having our creaking hearts down here with a spawning platform above it. We're using some pistons to shift the top and bottom rows back and forth. That way all of the resin falls off pretty quickly there. And as you can see, that's pretty much all there is to it. It's just on a very simple 4-tick repeater clock here. And then we have a trident killer for each and every one of them, which is where it gets a little bit expensive. But this is Bedrock Edition. We have trident farms. So this little farm produces about 5,200 resin every 10 minutes or 1 Minecraft night, meaning that you get about 15,500 resin an hour. And overall, it works pretty well. Now, this build is designed to be modular, so this is just 2 slices or a basic setup, but I expanded it to 6 slices over here. So getting all the creakings to spawn in there is actually really easy. You just need to stand on one of the edges while you're wearing a pumpkin, and then as soon as it becomes midnight, you're gonna have a ton of these guys spawn in there. Now, because we're wearing a pumpkin, they're actually going to keep walking towards us while we're in survival mode. You need to have them all come towards one edge. That way more guys can spawn on the back sides over there, as you can see, because they can't spawn inside of each other. So if you just stand here for like 10 seconds, all of them are going to spawn in, and then you just go down beneath the farm or somewhere else. These guys will stop targeting you, and then they'll simply, you know, get distributed and nudge each other along. That way all the trident killers properly work. So if we turn on the farm, as you can see, all of these guys are getting hit by our trident killers here. They're spawning in a ton of resin, and all that resin is getting broken off the walls and sent into our storage system. Now, this farm does cause a little bit of lag once you get to around the 60 creaker mark, but that is simply because of all the particles. So if we look away from this thing, our frame rate returns. And this farm can be made even larger if you want. We can expand it that way, and we can expand it to the left, and we can even just make multiple of these modules. So these features aren't even released yet, so I'm not going to do a proper tutorial on this full big build, but once the features and the winter update drop, then I'll make a full tutorial for this. If you'd like this kind of Minecraft video, then make sure to subscribe. I have many more tutorials on the way, and thank you for watching.